Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is trainer education, and we're going to cover 5 lessons for teaching cues. So I want to tell you about something that happened recently, and kind of 5 lessons that I learned or relearned or kind of thought might be helpful for others to learn from that experience. So recently I was going through squatting mechanics with someone that I've worked with for a couple years now. And we were trying to go through their squat, and things just weren't clicking right. So they were having trouble getting a feel for how the squat should have went. And some of the things that we had kind of talked about in the past, and we would find that we would correct within an individual session, they weren't being retained from session to session. So the issue we started having was we would try to relearn things, and it was just causing us to kind of like waste time each session, to where we were kind of not really moving forward as much as we were just kind of like cycling back through. So there wasn't like this progression of improvement of technique. We would kind of like make some improvement, maybe a couple sessions in a row. Then all of a sudden, like, we would go back and something would look weird or look different in their squat. We'd talk about a cue, but all of a sudden the cue would seem almost like it was brand new for them. And we kind of talked it out, and mentally, in their mind, they were aware that there was issues. So they knew, yeah, you've told me that, and I know I've kind of done it before, but I just lost the feel of it. I can't figure it out. And they were even having a hard time just kind of explaining why that cue wasn't there that day. So their brain was aware of the issue, but their body was doing its own things. And this happens a lot. So I was working with somebody else here recently, and we were teaching a new squat form for them. And it was a form in between kind of 2 different ways that they had done it in the past. And the problem that was happening was their body was trying to do one or the other. It was going, okay, well, if you don't want this old pathway, I'm going to move to this other old pathway. And we had to find a pathway in the middle. And it was challenging to kind of like have the patience and awareness of what needed to be done to find that new third position. And that's common, that the body kind of uses old experiences to try to go, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, with current new experiences. And I do this all the time. We do it outside of the gym. It's just kind of like our human nature is we want to know things. And when somebody presents us something that we think we know, we kind of want to already go, yeah, I know that. But if we have the patience to listen, all of a sudden they teach us things that maybe we did know it in part, but we didn't know it in the way that they were presenting it. So this was something where, in this example, the client, like going back to the client, he was having trouble retaining the information. They were aware of it. They were interested in learning. They wanted to learn. They show up every day to learn, to our training sessions. But there just sometimes was just disconnect. So we went through their cues, and I told him, I said, I want you to write down all the cues that you tell yourself while you squat. And don't write anything, don't skip things, write every single thing you do. And we went through, we kind of redefined it, refined kind of some of the wording, changing around here and there, but we got it down to where it was basically 9 things they were telling themselves from the time that they would go to get under the bar to then getting to the bottom of the squat. When we went through the session, and I'm going to go through the 5 lessons of kind of what we went through here in the session of what made the changes for us, and we got it down to 5. So they had previously had 9 things that got them to the bottom, like the parallel of a squat, and then all they had to do was stand up. Now, there are a lot of things you would do while you stand up, or things you don't do while you stand up, but we're not there yet. So this person had 9 things that would get them to parallel. We got it down to 5 that got them to parallel, and a 6th actually that was added to kind of get them to do the walk back into the rack correct, to avoid any back pains, lower back pain. Okay, so it was associated with like some sciatic nerve issues. So we got them from 9 cues down to 5 cues, and the wording of the 5 cues was shorter than the 9 cues wording. So not only was it less cues, it was also just overall less words as well. So the lessons that we applied that I thought would be good to bring up and make other trainers aware that if you aren't paying attention to these lessons, these might be areas in which you can improve your teaching to current clients as well as new clients. So the one thing we looked at was to ensure that the words actually meant the same to each of you. I know this sounds weird, but it's very often that when you explain a cue, you will know what you mean. They will have an idea of what you mean, but sometimes those aren't the same. So very often in squats, you'll hear like a coach try to get someone to have a more forward tilt. So especially if they do low bar squatting, and especially if they have long femurs. So they're gonna when that person squats, if they have low bar and or long femurs, their chest angle is going to have to angle down towards the ground. They won't be able to squat straight up. So like a high bar or like front squat style position, they're going to be in a low bar, more hip bending, kind of bent over position. So their shins are going to stay more vertical, meaning their hips have to bend to a greater degree, which is going to require a forward tilt of the torso. Now, the key in this, in order for it to be safe and correct, is that the torso has to tilt in one unit, meaning that from the hips to the head, everything has to stay braced like a board. So everything's locked in, straight line, and whenever they tilt from their hips to bring their chest and head down, they stay straight through their spine and core muscles. So unfortunately what you'll see sometimes is a coach will kind of cue their athlete to push their butt back, but they don't allow their chest to drop down, so the person actually just arches their lower back and shoves their butt back, but they keep their chest up. This creates an arch in the back, which means they're loosening their abdominal wall and abdominal muscles. So they over-rely on their lower back muscles to hold the positioning of their upper body and the bar weight if it goes in front of their center of gravity. So this causes a lot of lower back stress. It can cause a lot of power loss because they don't have a nice tight core between the bar and their feet is where they're creating the pressure through the ground. And then also it can create a knee collapse. So as they go down the squat, their knees will kind of dip inwards because they don't have proper bracing from their hips. So the cue of butt back will sometimes lead an athlete or a person, client, to arch their back and lose core tightness. So a cue that I've had to kind of adopt and kind of redefine with clients is the word tilt, meaning I do want them to have their butt go backward as their chest starts to angle, like tilt down to the ground. So we use the word tilt rather than butt back. So if they were to tilt their upper body from their hip to their head as a straight line, if they were to tilt the board, like if they were a board, if they were to tilt forward, that causes their butt to go back and their chest to come down. So I tell them it's like if you have a laser pointer coming out of your chest, we want that red dot to go down more towards the floor, like between your feet. So you have to be bent over, almost like you would bend over in a conventional deadlift. So if you're in the bottom of a conventional deadlift, like getting the bar off the ground, the upper body is going to be at like somewhat of like a 45 to 60 degree angle for most people. So they have to accept that as they squat, the upper body has to be allowed to tilt like that. So their chest does have to start to point downward. The chest cannot always point straight in front. Now, often people will feel that that's important because otherwise they're going to fall forward and be pushed forward. But if that upper body angle is created by their butt going backward, it keeps the bar centered over the midfoot and there's no forward push of the bar. So it won't push them forward. However, if their hips stay in place and they create that tilt by just shoving their chest forward, then yes, the bar is going to push them forward. So the key is when they're creating that tilt, that their butt has to go back to start that tilt to maintain the bar centered over their midfoot. So that's sometimes why a coach would say butt back. However, there needs to be the awareness of the athlete or client that if the butt goes back, the chest has to come down if the upper body is staying tight, solid from hip to head. So that's something that's important to note, like to kind of discuss. So if the coach says butt back, and in their mind that includes a tight core, we need to make sure that the client and or athlete, like that they know that as well. They have to know that the core has to stay tight if they're going to push their butt back. So sometimes, like a cue will mean one thing to one person, another thing to another person, and what they mean to each person is very, very, very similar, but there's a, a significant difference in the sense of it might be a minute difference, but it's very meaningful to the difference of the technique that the person will display. So that is one lesson learned, is ensure that the cue, okay, the words that you like mean the same to each of you. So if you're saying butt back, know that they know that that means they must tilt to create a butt back, not just arch their back and shove their butt back while their chest stays up. So that's one thing. So another thing we have is to revisit old cues. So sometimes you have to, as a trainer, remember that somebody may have remembered something before, but it doesn't mean they're going to remember it today. And we pretty much know this already when, like, trainers is, we'll have a client come in, we're like, in our minds, we're like, man, we taught you this like last workout and it looks like shit today. So that person had a million other things to do. They had their to-do list of life. They had work. They had home, responsibilities, maybe spouse, maybe kids. They would have, tasks and errands they're running. They have a lot of shit that they thought from their last session to this session. So it's okay and it's totally reasonable to revisit old cues. And as a trainer, it's actually a good idea to kind of prompt that to happen rather than wait to see if they remember and have their form kind of break down. So something I'll do sometimes with people is like when we go to do, like, say, example of a squat, is I'll say, hey, do you remember what we worked on last time? Can you tell me like one of the cues or so? And if it was a very specific cue, like remembering to keep pressure in their heels, I'll see if they remember it to say it. If they don't say it, then they probably won't remember to do it. So sometimes getting the person to verbalize their remembrance of their cues helps a lot, because if they don't name something, they're probably not going to do it. So that's one thing you can do, is have them verbalize it before they start. Or you can even prompt somebody, say you want to test them to see what they remember. You can say is, hey, we're going to go ahead in the first, maybe 1, 2, or 3 sets, and it's your choice how many you pick. But you can say, hey, you're in the first set here, I'm just going to let you squat, kind of see what we remember, and then we'll kind of pick up with anything that we forget, and we'll kind of go from there for the day. So this is often kind of an approach I have when I work with athletes who come down for a singular kind of visit, or I'm brand new to working with them. Like, I've worked with coaches before, so I've worked with like CrossFit coaches who want to learn power lifts. So they'll want to learn how to squat for strength versus squatting for like Olympic lifting assistance. So when they come in, instead of me starting from ground zero, I'll just say, hey, why don't you show me like how you'd squat for your strength stuff, and then we'll just tweak it from there. So that way they know that there's like going to be changes needed made, but I'm not necessarily specifying what those changes are at first, because I don't know if I want to start from ground zero and cover everything under the sun if they're going to get, maybe half the stuff right naturally anyhow. So that's something you can do, is revisit old cues, either reviewing them verbally ahead of the person doing the move, or telling them verbally that you're going to be kind of working on the technique, and it's okay if you have to edit new things, but you're going to let them do a set or two just to see what stuck from last time. So another reason why it's good to revisit old cues is I've worked with tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of clients who are nervous about forgetting something. So therefore, they'll try to remember a thing that'll help them remember the other thing. Okay? So they're like, oh, I don't want to forget that, so I got to remember to do this so I remember that. Well, the problem is they only remember this. They forget why the hell they remember that thing, and they never do the other thing. So say in order to remember thing 1, they try to remember thing 2. Then all of a sudden, all they ever do is thing 2, and they never understand or forget why the hell thing 2 is ever there. And you don't even know they're doing thing 2 because you only ever told them thing 1. So you didn't know that they try to remember 2 things to remember the one thing. So they're kind of in their head, you're just going, hey, do you remember Q1? And they're like, yeah, I'm doing it. But they are actually doing Q2, thinking that it was leading to Q1. And if you're confused at all, imagine how we feel as trainers, okay? So I've oftentimes had people do that where I'm like, hey, are you doing this thing? And they're like, yeah, I'm doing this thing. And I'm like, no, you're not. So, you're doing something, but you're not doing the thing that I need you to do. So all of a sudden we talk, and, for example, if you have somebody like, maybe you had an old cue where they were supposed to push their big toe down into the ground when they squat, and then turn their knee outward to create hip tightness. And then all of a sudden, all they remember is push the big toe down. So, you're saying, hey, are you, you getting your hips tight? Yeah, I'm putting my big toe down. Okay, but you still need to rotate your knee out. So you remembered one of them, but you didn't remember the whole thing, or they didn't remember why the big toe had to go down. So for you, in order to rotate your knee outwards to create glute tightness, you have to prevent the ankle from rolling outwards. That's why you would push the big toe down. So you have to push the big toe down, then you have to roll, like create a twisting by rotating your knee outward without having that ankle roll. So by shoving the big toe down and you rotating your knee out, you're making sure the ankle roll doesn't happen, and therefore you get the tightness built up in your hip. So that often happens when cues get kind of old and stale and you haven't covered them in a while. So they'll be going, yeah, okay, big toe down, but then they forget that that was to associate with rotating the knee out. So there's a whole bunch of layers of stuff like that, which is comical after the fact, but frustrating at the time. And it's not really frustrated at the person, you're just frustrated at the person's body because it's not moving well and not remembering things. So another thing we have is to teach why. So if you teach the person why they're doing the cue, that can often help it stick. So recently, I went through with the client who was squatting, and they weren't unracking the bar properly. And I told him, I said, hey, when you unrack the bar, we need to do that by squeezing your glutes. Squeeze your glutes to push your hips under the bar, and then unrack it. And they said, well, why? I can unrack it like this. And they just basically were pushing through their quads and walking back through their quads. And I said, well, yeah, you can now. I said, but when it gets heavier, you're going to want to have your glutes activated from the time you unrack the bar. So that way the glutes can support the lower back and hip structures as you walk the bar out. And then if the glutes are tight, you're already going to have your psoas pretty well set in terms of tightness. Then whenever you create your tilt during your squat, it's going to allow you to stay better on your heel pressure because your psoas is correct, meaning your hip position was correct. And then the bar path is going to allow the bar to be centered over midfoot. So if they unrack with their glutes, it'll ensure that their psoas is in place, which will ensure that their tilt goes well, which will ensure that they have good heel pressure, which ensures that the bar stays over midfoot. So it's kind of like if they do the one thing, it leads to all the other things. So that's why it was helpful for them to learn why unracking the bar was so important. They used to just unrack it, kind of save energy until they got their feet in place, and then try to create tightness. No. So as soon as the bar is on you, you must be tight. So that includes the walkout of a squat. So the walkout of a squat is just as important as the squatting of the squat. Okay? So is walking back in, especially when you have sciatic nerve pain or lower back pain. You have to maintain psoas tightness and proper hip tilt, so that way as you walk the bar back in, you don't get a pinching on the sciatic nerve. So there's a lot of things that are layered that if we don't specify as teachers to the clients, okay, as trainers, if we don't specify the meaning behind it, okay, what those layers are, the person might not understand how important that cue is. Now, wouldn't it be amazing and wonderful if they just assumed that everything we told them was important? Yes, that would be freaking awesome, but it's not human nature, okay? So, as you can be stubborn and just be mad that they're not listening, or you can work with human nature, I would suggest that you work with human nature rather than waiting for humans to change their nature, okay? So, teach why. That's our third lesson. The fourth lesson is to refine and shorten. So make sure you tell them terms that are in the shortest way possible to get the message across. So you can explain it in a lot of words, but then you have to have the actual cue that they remember being only a few words. And the reason why is often in our short-term memory, I think that's based on science and stuff, is they say we can only remember about 7 things at one time. Now that's 7 things. It doesn't mean you can only remember 7 numbers. You can chunk the numbers off. So I can remember my zip code. That's one thing, even though there's 5 numbers in it. So you can remember 7 things. So if you want somebody to work on their cues that day, don't try to give them 4,000 things to remember. They can really only remember 7. Now, I would argue don't even bother getting close to 7 cues. I would say work on 1, make sure you get the 1 right. Add a second one. See if they can do the second one while maintaining the first one. If you're going to get frisky, go for 3, but I don't think it's going to go well from there, okay? So if you're teaching new things, I would absolutely keep it to 3 or less in a single session and just let them get refinement and practice so those 3 things can become more autopilot, become more mindlessly automatic for that person before you then add a 4th, 5th, and 6th. So the client I had who had 9 lessons learned, like they had 9 cues to get them to the bottom of the squat, that's a lot to remember. Now, a couple of those were actually automatic and they were kind of doing them really well, but they had kind of lost touch as to why they were doing them, and we wanted to refine the whole process to get it down lower. So that's why we revisited all of them and got it down to 5 cues to get them to parallel, and then a 6th cue to finish the squat. Okay? So the last lesson we got here is encourage patience. So this is difficult for people, but people will want to know everything that they need to know, and they want to know it now. That does not work. So you can't tell somebody before they start squatting, here's all of the cues that you'll ever need to know for squats. Can't be done, ain't going to work, never going to happen. Okay? Now, people want to know that sometimes, especially if they're perfectionist in natures, and that's their personality type, like type A, or perfectionist type. They're going to want to know everything because they want to get everything right. But how the hell are they going to get everything right out of a brand new skill? Ain't going to happen, right? So if I sat down with them and I said, hey, I want to teach you how to play the guitar. I can't teach them some, magical, amazing chord until they actually know what notes, are on the strings. So if I want them to play, a chord of like a C, D, E, I have to first teach them a C. Then I have to teach them what a D is. Then I have to teach them what an E is. Then they have to learn how to play multiple chords at one time, and then all of a sudden they can play that chord. So the same thing is true with squats. You can't teach somebody everything at one time. So I tell my clients all the time that we have to build a library of feelings. Meaning I'm going to tell you something, okay, the bare minimum to get you moving and moving safely. I'm going to let you do some reps there. I'm going to have you do 10 reps. And I go, well, I don't know if they're right. I say, don't worry about that. There's no way in hell you're going to get it right anyhow. So you've never done it before. Just do 10 that look like shit, and then I'll fix it from there. So, because as a trainer, you don't know what they're going to get right. You don't know what they're going to get wrong. Maybe their foot angle pressure, let's just say that. Okay, let's go with squat stance. Maybe as soon as they walk the bar out, their feet are in the right stance. Awesome. Why would you waste 10 minutes teaching that if that's naturally what they do? So instead of preemptively trying to teach every cue, when they might get some of the cues right, it's better to let them try a couple reps, see what they get right or wrong, and then teach from there. Now, type A personalities don't like that. But that's the best way to teach, the fastest way to get them to learn now. The problem they don't like that is usually because they have to give up control of the learning environment. So now there are many other personality types that this doesn't work well with. So people who are very shy and timid, they're going to be afraid they're getting things wrong. So they kind of want to know what they should get right, what it is that they should be working on. It's like, hey, I don't want you to know everything right now. You're going to feel overwhelmed. And there's really no way you can get 10 things right. So let's just work on this one thing. I want you to get that right. Just try 10 reps focusing on that. Let's not worry about anything else. Then as that gets better, let's work on a second thing. Let's work on a third thing. So sometimes you have to get people just how to get under a bar correctly, how they should have their back tightness, their shoulder blades to be squeezed together, lats pulled down to pull their shoulder blades down to the hips. You might even have to work on hand grip on the bar. There's going to be a lot of cues that you have to work on sometimes before you even get to the cue that you would have thought that you would have started with. So it's hard to get somebody's squat stance right when they can't even unrack the bar properly. So sometimes as a trainer, you have to just kind of let the person go, and you have to encourage them that this is the way that's the best for them to learn. So you have to encourage them to be patient, knowing that they're going to feel kind of insecure about what they're getting right or wrong at that moment. As best as you can encourage that patience, the better kind of learning environment you're going to be able to kind of foster and create in that moment. Okay? So those are 5 good lessons for teaching cues. Is ensure the words mean the same to each of you. Okay, so revisit your cues. Make sure they both of you are understanding it 100% correct, the same. So you can revisit old cues. That way they kind of remember the right thing rather than a thing they remember to kind of remember the old thing. You can teach why the cues make sense and have meaning. That way they'll kind of adhere better to those cues. You can also refine and shorten cues. It helps a lot. So when you're teaching things, explain them, but then refine them to a single or maybe 2 words that they would have to remember the concept. So explain the concepts in words, but give a cue in small words, okay? And then encourage patience. Cool. So those are 5 awesome lessons that are going to give you a better ability to teach kind of new skills and how you can better give teaching cues. So if you're having difficulty as a trainer teaching someone how to do like a any lift. Like, let's say, for example, squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, even lateral raises is weird for people to learn. So if there's any exercise that you're having trouble teaching clients, email us and we'll help you out. So we'll make a YouTube video, maybe a tutorial, teaching tutorial on it, kind of whatever we need. We'll make a podcast or a video, whatever. So if there's anything we can do to help you become a better trainer, that's exactly why we're here. That's why we make these podcasts, and we want to be that resource for you. So reach out to us if there's anything you need. Our email is brutalironGym@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. If you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. The podcast is for you, so we'll know what you want to learn about. You can tell us at our email at brutalironGym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.